Right, the next thing is that Claus, Thorp, Hansen and myself will give the introduction to why are we having this day and what are we going to hear about. We have called the day Disruptive Conceptualization Day. So let us take a look at the two words. First, conceptualization, which Claus will say a few words about.
Yeah, this presentation or introduction very carefully, so I'll take care of one of the words, and Torben will then take care of the second word. And I'll start, he will take care of the first word secondly, and I'll take care of the second word firstly. That's the way. So, what is a concept, and what is conceptualization? And in our textbook, in the literature we are reading on design methodology, we can find the word concept used to describe some characteristics of the product functioning and maybe a bit part of the embodiment. So that's one word to use, a concept. It has something to do with the product, with the design. And other models, if people make models of the design process, then the conceptual design is a phase where the principle is determined, the principal solution. So that's what the literature says. If we look into industrial practice, one of our former colleagues, Jesper Olesen, studied how the word concept is used in industrial practice, and actually he finds many concepts during the product development phase. Product concept, business concept, market concept, product concept, and so on and so on. So we have this interesting situation here that on the one hand, literature says concept is a specific phase, conceptual design, and concept is something specific with respect to the solution, but in practice, concept is used much more. So, does there exist a concept phase, yes or no? And you can say, well, if we have to take these two different thinkings together, we could say, well, there is a concept phase if we carefully find out what is the conceptual elements in the design we are designing now, and if we clarify these conceptual elements, then we could talk about a concept phase. So, and then, what is the concept? And the way we define it here at our department, at least the way I define it when we talk about conceptualization, is that when we are talking about concept, there's an axis of concretization there. 0 means that no characteristics of the product has been determined, and at point 1, every characteristics of the product has been determined. And then we know principle relates to principal solution. Rather few characteristics are determined, but where is concept? Is it here or is it here? And the first thing we say is the concept is there where it shows a difference that matters. So where do we find the difference that matters? And secondly, we say a concept is not one idea. A concept has to encompass two ideas, namely the idea with, where the product is seen in the use context. You see there's a product, there's a user, he or she is using the product for some purpose, and there's also an output. And we say, with respect to the idea with, we have to understand the product in its context and find the difference that matters. And then idea in, that's the engineer and designer, he or she is focusing on the technological elements, mode of action realization and so on, in order to be able to realize the idea with. So a concept is not one idea, it's two ideas, the idea with and the idea in. And then we can ask, then if we take this thinking, how do we synthesize concepts? Well, we have to focus not only on mode of action realization, which is one axis, but also on context, because the difference that matters, seen in the user's perspective, relates to the context, the stakeholders, history, time window, and so on. So we'll say conceptualization involves this simultaneously attention to need market side and to the technical side. That's concept, and now we find out what does disruptive mean.
Then even though that I'm used to shouting pretty loud when talking to students, I think I will take this one anyway. Yes, I should say a few words about why have we chosen the word disruption in this context. I mean, in short, I can say the reason that we have chosen it is that we want to look at conceptualization and how this
can be used to make a difference in industry. But you could ask the question, what does disruption mean in this context? Does it mean that we will take a change in direction? Will it mean change of the game rules that we are playing after? Would it mean a radical change to what we are doing? Or as it could also mean that it's a high profit opportunity. Now, I will take an example, a very ugly old example, a washing bowl. The question is this disruption? I'm sure you would say no. I mean, a stupid washing bowl, can that be a disruption? But I would argue, yes, it can be. When you look back when it was introduced back in the 1940s, what were you washing up in? You were using old-fashioned basins made of steel. Imagine that you should wash up your glasses and your china in this made of steel. It was so easy to break the stuff. So when the first plastic bowls came, everyone was thrilled. This was really a competitive advantage. It was a functional improvement to what you had. So they could be sold at a much higher price. And even though that we today consider them cheap, at that time it was considered a major advantage. And then there was another story behind it, and that was that the companies produced it. They used that to come into the market. People bought their washing bowls, and then suddenly they could also sell a lot of other plastic goods because they become much more accepted. Now, the word disruptive has been used by many people, most famously probably by Clayton Christensen. And he talks about disruption in a number of different ways. He started by talking about disruptive technology and later switched over to talk about disruptive innovation. And when he looks at innovation, he compares that when something is disruptive, it's an opposite to being sustainable. And sustainable innovation is business as usual. That is what you have been doing all the time, where a little step at a time leads you to a new product, which hopefully will sell a little better, or at least stand the competition. And then he also splits between low-end disruption and new market disruption. Low-end disruption is actually a little bit difficult to understand, I found, at least when I was reading about it. But as he explains it, is that you will start with the least profitable consumer. I mean, start at a market which you don't think will give any money, at least in the short run. It will probably cost a lot of money to go into the market. So therefore, many companies will avoid going into these areas. But his claim is that if you do that and select the right ones, and select a technology and a type of innovation with a nice growth rate, then you could revolutionize the market. I thought of if I could find an example, and I found that Wikipedia could be such an example. I mean, you probably all remember when Wikipedia started some years ago, it was not considered anything very nice. One could find bad information in Wikipedia, but it was freely available. So if you want to know something, it was very easy to just find it on your computer. Today, the amount of information accessible in Wikipedia is by far larger than any of the encyclopedia. And the quality is also much better. So they have come into the market by doing something which we don't think is so nice, and then they have taken off and has become much bigger. New market disruption, on the other hand, is that you offer a new functionality. And that's also where we found it interesting when one of the topics that we're going to talk about today, biomimetics, is a way of introducing new functionality. But examples of where disruptive innovation can take place could be the plastic bowl I just mentioned. It could also be Gore-Tex, the type of textile which resists water, but we can breathe through it, which also was a revolution in textile industry. There's another guy called Selene who talks about technology support networks, which he thinks is very important when you talk about disruptive innovation. And the reason is that it's not enough just to look at the product itself. You have to look about the whole supportive network around it. I mean, thinking about electric cars, he talks about there you need to compete against the whole support networks of gas stations. They will very much resist that you will introduce the electric cars because that would ruin their business if they can change over to electricity. You will experience these networks in many cases. So there's a lot of people which will be against that you do something completely different. And therefore, that's an important element in when talking disruptive innovation. But we're not talking disruptive innovation here, we're talking disruptive conceptualization. And that means that we're talking about how can you do something very different and how can you then develop, how can you create the next product which can be a game changer. And that is what Claus calls the idea with. I mean, what do the markets say to the market? Will the market accept it? And then we will look at technology, we would look at biomimetics, because that's one way of introducing technology that will enable new functionality, and that would be what Claus called the idea in. And that we will do by the program that you all have seen. We have divided the day into two. First, we have the industrial presenters, where we will listen to Thomas Aakjær from CATA, John Siebert from Leo Innovation Lab, Thor Olsen from Oticon, and Thomas Goldman from Gianetcom Jabra, talking about what they are doing when they do conceptualization. And then we have, from the university world, we have Vilas Johansen from Cambridge University, Erik Warrant from Lund University, Tobias Seidel from the Biomimetics Institute in Westphalia, and myself, giving you examples of how biomimicry can make a difference and maybe can lead you to the technology which will give you new ways of conceptualizing. That is the program for today. But why don't we jump right into it and ask Thomas to come up here and give us the first presentation.